his head about like that, a deep cut. And I didn't know that till he was dead 6 months. And so that's I've lived with that.
Tell us about the day where you were and what happened when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. I know you remember that.
Do I remember that? Oh, you see, my nephew was over there. That's Elmer Hickson.
He's telling us about Pearl Harbor.
I can't, oh, is that Lois?
Yes.
Yes.
He's telling us about Pearl Harbor.
Oh, that was bad. Oh, that was bad. My goodness. And my nephew, he was over there. He said they heard that awful roaring sound. He was about 200 miles away from it. And so he said it was absolutely terrible. He said, you knew better than to walking under a tree because you never knew when one of them was up in a tree ready to snap you off. And, but that was bad, let me tell you. And you know, Elmer wasn't quite the same when he came back from there. He was, oh my, irritable. And it was just too bad, goodness. Oh, I don't know why they ever allowed that atomic bomb to be made. Because did you ever stop to think that killed women, babies, and all? That's cruel. When God says thou shalt not kill, but yet he allows them to go ahead and have war, which does kill. Now, is that the works of the necessity or what? Can you tell me, Lois?
How about the day President Kennedy was shot?
Oh, her daddy was laying here on the couch, Davenport. Not this one, another one. And Corrine called, and she said, Mother, President Kennedy's was shot. Get the radio on. So I ran in and put the radio on. Oh, that was terrible, let me tell you. That radio went on day and night. It was just something terrible that we witnessed. So,
Now you've been here since 1905. Now what?
no, I've been, yes, here.
You were born in 1905.
Yes.
So you've seen cars come along.
Oh.
You've seen airplanes.
I saw horse and buggies, carriages, wagons, you name them.
Airplane.
Oh my, yes, and the other big thing, what do you call them? Zeppelin.
Yeah, the airships.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what did you think? Since you came, when you came, there weren't cars in that, and then you get to see the first man on the moon. Right?
Well, I tell you, and I don't miss a thing on that, because I observe everything. That means an awful lot. Instead of sitting around talking about people, I'm observing. And I don't want to get the two mixed, because as you get older, you don't dare do those things. But I'll never forget my daddy was with me when we saw the first big thing coming across over 2 fields on the farm. And Dad said to me, what is that? I said, well, I don't know, Dad, what that is. And it was just moving so slow. And what did they call those then?
Derricks.
What?
Derrick?
No.
Blimp?
Well, no, they had a name for it. Here, the man, When the
Lindbergh?
Oh, I remember that. I must tell you about that. We took that awfully hard. I did, because I had children. And he was such a beautiful child. His head was just a mass of curls. And so I thought, well, we were living here. And I thought, oh my, I'll lock those windows at night. Mind in the hot summer weather, I locked the windows upstairs and around. Daddy come home from work one night and he said, my, it's awfully hot in this house. He said, what's wrong that the windows aren't up? And I said, oh, Daddy, I'm just afraid somebody might steal one of ours. He said, they will if you don't stop this.
Grandma, if you had any advice to give young people today, what would you tell them?
Well, of course, they could go through the life I went through on the farm and enjoy every bit of it. It was a great life to live. That's what I would say. Don't get into these worldly things. Stay with your schools, your church, and your, as I always told you and all the rest of them, that when you get into school, choose your friends. Which I knew you would know what Grandma meant. Good. And what else could you? And obey your father and mother, whatever you do, obey your father and mother. Because they are older and they've had experience. And we knew when Mother spoke. She said, she took us and she explained to us, now when I tell you to go do something, I'll not speak again. So that meant you go do what she tells you, and it's behind you. And no, we didn't speak back to Daddy and Mother. I can remember my father saying to me, he was 89 when he died. And he lived longer if he hadn't have fell and broke his hip. He said, you know, the Bible says, honor thy father and thy mother. And he said, I surely did. I never spoke back once to my father and mother. And he said, which I knew one time I come home, and Dad and Mother was in bed, and he said, I was a little hungry. And so I went into the hanging shelf, and he said, I didn't want to put any lights on or anything. So here he said, I took a hold of this basket that had eggs in it. Now I said, I spilt those eggs. And I got reprimanded for it. But he said, I never said a word. I'll never forget that. And they would take time and sit down and talk to us. And Mother was a Presbyterian. And this is what I said to Shirley's son-in-law when we were down there. I said, he said, well, did you know, Grandma, I have gone Presbyterian. I said, now, I'm going to tell you, that's fine if that's what you want. I said, remember, my mother was born and raised a Presbyterian, but she married a Methodist. And I said, you know, we never discussed that. We never talked about that. But when she made it plain that she wanted a Presbyterian minister to preach her funeral, and that's what we had. And no.
So you'd say you've lived a good life, Grandma?
What?
Would you say that you've lived a good life?
Mine? I would have to say yes. Because I'll say in my prayers at night, now God, you gave me something that I must hold on to, something to know right from wrong. And I said, I take time and I think these things out. I said, they mean a lot to me. And, I couldn't tell you how many times my mother read that Bible. We had to hear that Bible read every night. And so it was like a little prayer meeting we had. And I had an uncle. He had his room upstairs above the one we would hold our meetings in. And he would be having his meeting upstairs there. You'd hear him praying and singing. He never was married. And he lived with all of us. But, well, that's the way it was. And, no. And when you think now, here's the way it was. We'd get up in the morning. Of course, we had to walk to school. The ground was bought off of our farm. And it was on the edge of the second field across. And when Dad and Mother got married, they took 16 acres back over of the farm from the road that went down between the schoolhouse and where Dad and Mother built. And they built this house. It's still standing. Of course, they've remodeled a little bit and done to it, you know. And Grandpa come over one day after Grandmother had died, and he said, Elmer, I want you and Agnes to come over and move in and take things over. Well, I had to think of the place, you know, they'd have to sell it. So they did, and so then they took over and was with Grandpa. And then Grandpa had it fixed that Dad was to buy the farm. And so he got the horses, the cows, everything like that from Grandpa. But he was to buy the farm. And so he did. When he and Mother got married, now mine, when you think, well, what do they have when they get married? Now my dad was 28 years old when he got married. He had $2,500 in the bank. Now mine working on the farm there. And well, then the uncle, he wanted to live with Dad and Mother. So he said if he would turn what he would get from his daddy over to Dad and Mother, could he live with them? And so Mother and Dad talked it over, and he made his home with them. He was there 30-some years. And, but it was just wonderful. Dad needed help on the farm. And just having the one son while we girls took over. We helped Dad and Mother. But oh, it was a wonderful life, my goodness. The fields were so big. And, well, there'd be two of us would go out to hoe corn. You'd think from when you'd start at this end and go up, you'd never get to the top. The corn rows were so long.
Well, Grandma, why don't you look in the camera and say a few final words? Why don't you just say a few words to the camera before the tape ends?
Oh, yes. I should say so. Never thought of that. I was so interested in telling you. I didn't want to forget.
I know.
And so I'll tell you, there was one. He is a Hoke. And he said to me back at the Cochran's mansion, he said, if I come over some of these times, will you tell me just where my father and my grandfather comes down? I said, now I'm going to tell you, Dawn. Why didn't you do this a few years ago? I said, I know who your father was, William Hoke. Yes, he said, that's right. And I said, now I need to find out who his father was. I said, sure, I'd give you all the help I could give you on that. Because when my daddy told me the history of the Hokes, I observed everything. I didn't want to miss a thing. And Mother told me of her side. And now I have the history of the McKelveys. My mother's mother was a McKelvey. And then she married a Wells, Aaron Wells. And they lived there in Ligonier. And every time we go out to the old church, well, it's not the old church, 'cause it's burned several times, Fort Palmer Church. Why, I'll say to Ernie, just think my mother lived here at one time. It was just wonderful.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Are we through now?
Wave into the camera.
Yeah.